Hi, thanks for stopping by again. So, March is Women's History Month, and I'd like to share with you a story today about my 11th great grandmother, and her name is Anne Marbury Hutchinson. So, Anne Marbury was born in Alfred, England, and christened in the Church of England in July of 1591. She was the third of 15 children born to Reverend Francis Marbury and Bridget Dryden. Grandma Anne's father was a minister in the Church of England in Alfred and also in London. He was once put on trial for his unorthodox teachings, but he later made peace with the Church of England. So, in the year 1612, Anne Marbury married William Hutchinson in London. And during the next 22 years, they resided in Alfred, England, where 14 of their children were born. Now, two of the daughters and a son were to pass away there. But in order to flee religious persecution, Anne and William decided that they would immigrate to America. By this time, they were fairly wealthy, but they were willing to give up the ease and safety of England for the wilderness of the New World. In order to follow an exiled minister by the name of John Cotton. That took a lot of courage and character, which Grandma Anne actually displayed throughout her entire life. Anne Marbury Hutchinson was described as being high-minded, charitable, and a devout Christian, and displayed an independence of thought and a firmness of convictions in religious matters for which she would later pay a penalty. I guess having grown up as the daughter of a minister, she was pretty well versed in theological type things. Um, in time, she would be honored as one of the most influential women in the Eastern colonies, and has since been called the most intellectual woman of her century in all of America. Now, in September of 1632, Anne and William arrived in Boston, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, on a ship called the Griffin, with 10 of their children. The 15th child was born in the Massachusetts Bay Colony 2 years later. Now, life in Boston, especially for women, was very hard. It was monotonous and quite depressing in the year 1634. In these grim surroundings, Anne Hutchinson brought new light and new life. She became a midwife. She dispensed medicine, wisdom, and cheer. She was beloved by many, and it is said that she was respected by all. Indeed, Governor Winthrop of the Massachusetts Bay Colony complained, and I quote, "Mrs. Hutchinson, a woman of ready wit and bold spirit, who brought over with her dangerous airs of religious belief, was more sought out for counsel and advice than any of the ministers." Now, Anne was not deterred by the growing resentment among the elders of the Puritan colony against her views and her outspokenness. Suspicion and jealousy were stirred up when she founded the very first women's club in America, a meeting in her home for women to get together and discuss the previous Sunday's sermon. Wives and daughters excluded from the discussions traditionally held by men. These bored women who were working very hard to, in a harsh week, flocked to her house to hear Anne talk about the sermons and share her ideas and beliefs. As Anne began to preach more and more of her own views, the crowd of women, and also many men, came to hear this new gospel and enjoy both her warm hospitality, and these meetings got bigger and bigger every week. Governor Winthrop of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the other Puritan elders let their suspicions and jealousies intensify. Grandma Anne's talks on theological doctrine cut behind the accepted words and phrases of the Puritan ministers, bringing fear and anger to their hearts, and the increased numbers to her meetings. One second, let me fix my computer. There we go. The elders questioned her action. One of them was quoted as saying, "What right had this mere woman, never ordained as a minister, to preach a divisive gospel? By what authority did she stress the grace of a believing heart over outward evidence, canon laws, and church attendance?" they would ask. An attack on the church was considered to be an attack on the state under the Puritan law then governing the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Finally, Anne herself was brought to trial before the General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch now and go live to the Massachusetts Courthouse in Boston, where Greg is going to share a little bit more about this story. So Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Greg. So I am in Boston, Massachusetts today. I'm standing in front of the Massachusetts State House, and unfortunately I can't get any closer than this. You're not allowed to go on the grounds today. But you can see over my shoulder there, and I'll take a close-up picture using the telephoto lens, is a statue of Grandma Anne. And let me pick up the story. So in November of 1637, Anne was forced to stand trial before the General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Her charges, she had troubled the peace of the Commonwealth and the churches. She was deemed not fit for our society, which being the Puritans, and was declared to be the fountain of all mischief and trouble in the colony. So, at the age of 46, a respected midwife with 15 children, pregnant with number 16 on the way, and was forced to walk from her place of imprisonment, the jail, to the Massachusetts courthouse, where she was forced for 2 days to stand trial for the charges. She was denied legal counsel and was not even allowed to have a friend or family member there to support her. So on her feet for 2 full days as she faced very harsh questioning. She defended herself very boldly. She was courageous and with a great conviction, but in the end, she was given a sentence of banishment from the Massachusetts colony. However, she was not immediately banished. She was actually forced to spend the winter in jail awaiting her church trial. And that happened in March of 1638. She was again brought before a council to face the Puritans' wrath. In the end, her sentence was pronounced. The court records show that it said that she was told, "I do cast you out in the name of Christ. I do deliver you up to Satan, that you may learn no more to blaspheme, to seduce, and to lie." And then was reported to have replied, "The Lord judgeth not as a man judgeth. Better to be cast out of the church than to deny Christ." So Anne was now banished from the Massachusetts colony and excommunicated from the church. I think it's kind of an interesting example of historical irony that her statue now stands in a place of honor before the court of Massachusetts, the court which so long ago cast her out. Interesting story. Greg, I'm going to turn it back over to you to finish Anne's tale.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that. Now, later, Grandma Anne's youngest sister, my Aunt Catherine, because of her religious views, was imprisoned in Boston and was cruelly whipped. Thus, these two Marbury sisters were among those leaders who fought for the right of religious freedom, which became, over a century later, one of the influential guarantees of the American Constitution. Expelled from Boston, excommunicated from the church, and pursued for the rest of her life by the Puritan elders in Boston, she helped establish a new settlement of religious freedom in the wilderness of what is now Rhode Island. She moved there with her husband, many of the followers that she had developed in Boston, and 9 of her children. Now, persecution followed Anne to Rhode Island. It appeared that Massachusetts would soon claim the jurisdiction over the colony that she had settled up in Rhode Island. And then in 1642, William passed away. Without his loyalty and without his protection, Grandma Anne was now a widow. And with 6 of her children, she moved to the New York wilderness, into what was then the Dutch settlements of New Amsterdam, which is in Westchester County, New York. And she built the first house in that area. In August of 1643, her settlement was attacked by Indians. They appeared to be friendly, but when the dogs had been tied up, the Indians cruelly murdered this devoted mother and all of her children except one. Her 9-year-old daughter, Susanna, was out picking blueberries, and she escaped the murder and the massacre that took place. The Indians actually took her captive, and she was held anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 years, depending on different accounts, when she was finally ransomed by the Dutch and returned to Boston. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt began her list of influential American women with Anne Marbury Hutchinson. She was the first of America's foremothers, and she today is seen as the original courageous exponent of civil liberty and religious toleration in America. I wanted also to point out that in 1987, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis pardoned Grandma Anne, revoking the order of banishment that was issued against her over 350 years ago. So, bottom line, we can be proud of Grandma Anne Hutchinson's efforts, and we can look to her as an example of standing firm in our convictions and always choosing the right. So, great story for Women's History Month. Thanks for stopping by. We'll talk to you again soon.